They said the rookie contract was a cage. They said once you entered the NFL, the league decided when you got paid, how much you were worth, and when you earned leverage. They said every rookie had to wait their turn. 3 years minimum, no shortcuts, no exceptions. That story just fell apart. Because Shedeur Sanders didn't wait, he didn't complain, and he definitely didn't play by the usual rules. While the public was focused on his rookie deal with the Cleveland Browns, something much bigger was happening quietly in the background. Something completely legal, and something that has the league very uncomfortable. Here's the part that's confusing people. The Browns didn't extend Shedeur's NFL contract. They couldn't. That would violate the CBA. His cap number is still tiny by quarterback standards. On paper, he's just another rookie. But off paper, that's where things change. Reports and industry buzz claim Shedeur secured massive off-field business agreements that exist entirely outside the salary cap. Not endorsements in the traditional sense, not commercials here and there. We're talking about long-term brand partnerships tied to ownership networks, media rights, and global exposure. Deals that don't count against the cap, deals the league doesn't control. And that's why this story isn't about money, it's about power. For decades, the NFL has operated on one sacred rule. The shield comes first. Players generate the value, but the league owns the machine. Jerseys, highlights, licensing, distribution. You get your slice when the system says you've earned it. Shedeur didn't ask for permission. Long before draft night, he built leverage, a following, a media presence that travels with him no matter what jersey he wears. That mindset didn't come out of nowhere. It was taught, carefully, for years, by Deion Sanders, a man who lived through an era where athletes were global icons but still treated like assets instead of owners. Now here where things get tense. League insiders are whispering. Rival executives are furious. Some are calling this cap circumvention. Others are calling it dangerous precedent. Officially, no rules have been broken. Unofficially, the fear is obvious. If one rookie can do this, what happens when established stars demand the same structure? And that's why this moment matters. This isn't about whether Shedeur Sanders will succeed on the field. That question is secondary now. The real issue is whether he just exposed a loophole so powerful that the league has to rewrite the rules to survive it. Because if players start realizing they don't need the NFL to own their brand, then the entire business model changes. And the league knows it. To understand why this move shook the league, you have to understand the system players usually walk into. The NFL doesn't just sell football, it sells control. The moment a player enters the league, they don't just sign a contract. They enter an ecosystem where almost everything connected to their image is centralized. Jersey sales, pooled, highlight clips, owned by the league. Sponsorship access, filtered through league partners. Even when a player becomes wildly popular, the money flows upward first, then trickles back down in carefully measured portions. That's why the rookie deal exists the way it does. It's not just about cost control, it's about leverage control. Young players generate excitement, storylines, and ratings, but they're locked into fixed salaries while the league monetizes their momentum at full speed. By the time most players gain real negotiating power, the peak attention has already passed. That model has worked for decades because it relies on one assumption. Players need the league more than the league needs any individual player. What just happened challenges that assumption. Instead of fighting the rookie wage scale head-on, which would be impossible under the current agreement, Shedeur's camp went around it. Not by breaking rules, but by refusing to hand over something the league quietly depends on: full ownership of personal brand rights. Normally, players sign broad licensing agreements without thinking twice. It's boilerplate language. Everyone signs it. Few question it. That language is what allows the league to package faces, names, and moments into billion-dollar deals. When you sign it away, you're no longer a brand. you're a contributor. This time, that didn't happen. By retaining independent control over his name, image, and likeness at the professional level, Shedeur didn't just secure endorsements. He secured positioning. Every piece of attention tied to him became something negotiable, not something automatically absorbed by the league machine. That's why owners are uneasy. Because this isn't about one player making extra money. It's about what happens if more players realize the same path exists. Imagine a league where the most marketable stars don't funnel their value into a shared pool. Imagine negotiating broadcast deals without guaranteed access to the faces fans actually tune in to see. That's the nightmare scenario. And it explains why the reaction hasn't been loud yet. No public outrage, no official complaints, just closed-door meetings, quiet calls to legal teams, and early discussions about tightening future agreements. Because once control slips, it's almost impossible to take back. And that leads directly to the next question everyone inside the league is asking right now. How did this get approved in the first place? At first glance, nothing about the signing looked unusual. The contract fit neatly inside the rookie wage scale. The cap hit was clean. The paperwork passed every standard review. On paper, it was exactly what the league expects from a young quarterback drafted outside the first round. That's what made it so effective. Buried deep inside the broader agreement wasn't a salary provision or a bonus structure. It was a separation clause, one that drew a hard line between Shedeur Sanders the employee and Shedeur Sanders the enterprise. The league didn't lose money on the contract itself. It lost exclusivity. Most players never think to negotiate that distinction. Their contracts are about years, guarantees, and incentives tied to performance. This one was about ownership. Not ownership of a team or shares in a league, but ownership of the value created the moment attention follows you. What changed everything was that this clause didn't ask the NFL for permission to monetize him. It simply stated that anything created outside the field of play was not subject to league pooling. That meant personal media, brand partnerships, documentaries, merchandise concepts, and future licensing decisions stayed independent. The Browns didn't technically pay him more. That's the key detail people keep missing. The money didn't come from the team's payroll. It came from adjacent entities, separate corporations, separate books, entirely legal under the current framework. And that's where the panic began. Because the league's power has never been about salaries alone. It's been about consolidation, centralizing rights so no single player can operate outside the system. This clause cracked that foundation without violating a single rule. It also created a blueprint. Agents noticed immediately, not because of the number attached to it, but because of the structure. If one player could define themselves as a standalone brand while still playing under the shield, what stops the next one from doing the same? That question doesn't have a comfortable answer. What's more unsettling is that nothing about this required league approval. The agreement didn't amend the CBA. It didn't challenge salary caps. It simply used existing language differently than anyone before. That's what makes it dangerous. The NFL can punish rule breakers. It struggles with rule reframers, because you can't discipline someone for reading the fine print correctly. And while public attention stayed focused on money headlines, the real shift was happening quietly in front offices across the league. Executives weren't asking how much he made. They were asking how they missed it. Because once a door like this opens, it doesn't close easily. And the league knows it. Which is why the conversation immediately shifted to the person who made sure this wasn't accidental at all. Nothing about this move was spontaneous. It didn't begin in Cleveland. It didn't even begin on draft night. The groundwork was laid years earlier, long before league lawyers ever touched a document. The blueprint came from Day and Sanders. Coach Prime understands something most players never get taught. Leagues don't just control games. They control narratives, distribution, and ownership of attention. Dayan lived through an era where he was one of the most recognizable athletes on the planet, yet had very little say in how his image was monetized. He watched networks replay his highlights endlessly while he received a fraction of the value he generated. That lesson shaped how he raised his son. While other college quarterbacks focused solely on draft boards and combined metrics, Shedeur was building leverage. At Jackson State and later Colorado, he wasn't just a player. He was a content engine. Every post, every clip, every interview pushed traffic to platforms he controlled. YouTube, Instagram, direct fan engagement. The audience followed him, not the program. That distinction matters more than people realize. Because by the time Shedeur entered the draft, he didn't need the NFL to make him visible. Visibility was already locked in. Millions of eyes, a loyal following, a brand identity that existed independently of any team logo. That's why the draft slide didn't hurt him the way it usually hurts players. Most rookies rely on draft position for leverage. He relied on audience ownership, and that flipped the power dynamic before negotiations even started. So when contract talks began, his camp wasn't asking, "How much can we get under the cap?" They were asking, "What do we refuse to give away?" That's the shift. The league is used to players negotiating money. It is not used to players negotiating control. Control over likeness, control over storytelling, control over downstream value. This wasn't about challenging the NFL head-on. It was about bypassing the choke points quietly. If the league couldn't own the brand, it couldn't fully monetize the moment. And the most unsettling part, there was nothing the league could do about it without changing the rules entirely. Which brings us to the part that has executives genuinely worried right now. Because if one quarterback can pull this off, what happens when the next superstar tries it? The outrage online is loud, but it's missing the real point. This isn't about one quarterback getting rich early. It's about what happens if this structure spreads. Because once the door is open, it doesn't matter whether you're a fifth-round rookie or a generational superstar. Think about what would happen if a player like Patrick Mahomes demanded similar language, or if elite wide receivers, edge rushers, or franchise quarterbacks decided they no longer wanted to funnel their identity into a league-controlled pool. The NFL's entire business model depends on central ownership of player-driven value. Jersey sales, highlights, sponsored content, international licensing. The league doesn't just profit from football games, it profits from faces, from moments, from storylines it can package and resell. That's the leverage. If even a handful of top-tier players remove themselves from that ecosystem, the math breaks fast. Sponsors don't pay 9 figures for access to the shield. They pay for stars. If stars start owning their distribution, the league loses its middleman role. That's the nightmare scenario owners are quietly discussing. And here's the part that really stings. This wasn't done through confrontation. There was no strike, no public protest, no lawsuit. The system wasn't attacked. It was outgrown. The league can shut down rogue behavior. It can fine players, suspend them, rewrite rules. What it struggles with is precedent that's already legal. You can't punish someone retroactively for understanding the rules better than you did. That's why the pushback has been careful. Vague comments about integrity, whispers about future CBA adjustments, quiet signals that this won't be allowed again. But those fixes only apply going forward. This deal already exists, and agents are watching closely. Not because they think every rookie can pull this off, but because now they know the language works. The concept works. The structure holds. Once agents start inserting similar clauses, even on a smaller scale, the balance shifts. Slowly at first, then all at once. This is how control erodes in modern leagues. Not through rebellion, but through replication. And the NFL knows exactly how dangerous that is. Which is why the tension isn't just external, it's spreading inside locker rooms too. The most dangerous part of this entire situation isn't happening in boardrooms or legal departments. It's happening quietly, inside locker rooms. Because players are paying attention. Veterans who have spent 8, 10, even 12 years in the league are starting to do uncomfortable math. They're realizing how much value they generated versus how little control they ever had over it. Jerseys sold, highlights clipped, personalities marketed, all of it monetized by someone else. And then they look at one rookie. Not a top overall pick, not someone handed leverage by draft position, a fifth rounder who walked in already thinking like an owner. That changes conversations. Instead of asking, "How do I get my second contract?" players are asking, "Why don't I own my brand already?" Instead of relying on agents to chase endorsements, they're thinking about platforms, direct audiences, and long-term equity. That mindset is contagious. What makes it even more unsettling for the league is that this isn't theoretical. Shedeur Sanders isn't hoarding information. Reports suggest he's actively sharing what he's learned with teammates, how to protect media rights, how to separate personal brands from league licensing, how to think beyond salary. That's not rebellion, that's education. And education spreads faster than outrage ever could. This creates a strange power dynamic inside organizations. Teams are used to rookies being dependent, quiet, grateful, easy to mold. But when a rookie shows up financially independent and structurally untouchable, the hierarchy shifts. Coaches still control playing time. Front offices still control contracts, but they don't control relevance anymore. And relevance is where leverage lives now. For decades, the NFL trained players to believe success meant longevity inside the system. Stay quiet, stay available, stay brand safe. The reward was security later. This generation isn't waiting. They're watching how quickly attention moves, how fast platforms rise and fall, how little loyalty exists once performance dips, and they're adjusting in real time. That's what scares the league most. Not one contract, not one clause, but the realization that players no longer need permission to think this way. Once that mindset takes hold, it doesn't go back. And the NFL knows it's only a matter of time before the next player tries it. None of this happened by accident. This wasn't a lucky loophole or a last-minute legal trick. It was the result of a mindset that was shaped long before the NFL ever entered the picture. The blueprint traces straight back to Deion Sanders. Coach Prime lived through an era where athletes were global icons, but had almost zero control over the wealth they generated. He saw jerseys fly off shelves. He saw highlights replayed endlessly. And he saw how little of that money ever made it back to the players creating the demand. That lesson stuck. Instead of teaching his son how to survive the system, Deion taught him how to understand it, how leagues think, how contracts are written, where the money actually flows. Most importantly, how to build leverage before you need it. By the time Shedeur reached college, football was only one piece of the operation. The audience came first. Content came first. Direct connection came first. The platform existed independently of any team or conference. That's why this move worked. When most rookies enter the league, the NFL is the platform. For Shedeur, the NFL was just another distribution channel. A big one, sure, but not the only one. That flips the power dynamic completely. If the league suspends you, you disappear. If you already own the audience, the league just loses access to it. That's the leverage Prime understood years ago. And it's why the league can't easily stop what's happening now. They can adjust future CBAs. They can tighten language. They can close doors for the next wave. But they can't undo what's already been proven possible. This wasn't about arrogance or rebellion. It was about preparation, about entering the system already whole instead of dependent. That's the part most critics miss. Shedeur didn't beat the league by breaking rules. He beat it by never relying on it in the first place. And that realization leads directly to the most uncomfortable question of all. This is where the story stops being about one player and starts becoming an existential problem. Because the real fear inside league offices isn't Shedeur Sanders making money. It's what happens after everyone realizes how he did it. For decades, the entire structure of the National Football League has depended on one assumption. Players need the league more than the league needs any single player. That belief justified rookie wage scales, centralized licensing, revenue pooling, and airtight control over image and distribution. Shedeur quietly shattered that assumption. The moment his deal became public, phones started ringing across the league. Agents weren't angry. They were curious. They weren't asking if this should be allowed. They were asking how fast it could be copied. Because if one rookie can retain his own IP, carve out equity, and monetize independently, then the entire model starts cracking at the edges. Think about what this means in real terms. If even a handful of star players follow this blueprint, the league loses control over its most valuable asset: identity. Jerseys, highlights, social clips, documentaries, brand campaigns, all of it suddenly becomes negotiable. The Shield no longer owns the faces that sell the product. That's why the pushback has been quiet but aggressive. No public statements, no dramatic penalties, just sources, concerns, and whispers about tightening future CBAs, reports of internal meetings, legal teams reviewing language that hasn't been questioned in decades. They're not trying to punish Shedeur. They're trying to contain the idea. Because ideas spread faster than contracts. Veterans see it and realize how much they gave away early in their careers. Rookies see it and realize they don't have to start from zero. College players see it and understand that audience building now matters as much as draft position. And once that mindset takes hold, control becomes optional. That's the nightmare scenario. A league full of players who see themselves as partners instead of employees. Athletes who walk into negotiations with leverage instead of gratitude. Stars who don't beg for marketing deals because they already own distribution. You can't threaten someone who isn't dependent. And that's why this moment matters more than any stat line or win-loss record. Shedeur didn't challenge the league publicly. He didn't demand reform. He didn't call anyone out. He just showed what was possible. And sometimes that's far more dangerous than rebellion. Because now the question isn't whether the NFL can stop him. It's whether they can stop the next 10 players who are already paying attention. And that brings us to the final realization. The league doesn't want anyone saying out loud. What just happened here isn't a contract story. It's a power story. For decades, professional sports ran on a simple equation. The league owned the platform, the teams owned the access, and players were expected to wait their turn. Rookie deals, capped earnings, centralized control, everything was designed to keep authority flowing one way. That equation just broke. Shedeur Sanders didn't fight the system head-on. He didn't protest it. He didn't demand public reform. He did something far more disruptive. He stepped around it, quietly, cleanly, legally. By entering the league with his audience already built, his brand already valuable, and his leverage already established, he exposed a truth leagues don't like admitting. Control only works when dependency exists. The moment a player doesn't need the league for visibility, monetization, or relevance, the balance shifts. That's why this moment feels uncomfortable to people in power. It signals a future where athletes aren't just participants, they're independent operators, where the league becomes a stage, not a gate, where contracts aren't ceilings but foundations players build on top of. This isn't about one quarterback getting paid early. It's about what happens next, about the rookies watching closely, the agents rethinking strategy, the college athletes realizing that audience building matters as much as draft boards. The old model doesn't collapse overnight, but it doesn't survive unchanged either. What Shedeur proved is simple and dangerous. You don't have to wait your turn if you arrive prepared. You don't need permission if you already own the attention. And once that mindset spreads, there's no clause, no rule, no committee that can put it back in the box. This wasn't rebellion. It was evolution. And the league just realized it's no longer the only one holding the keys.